So I have literally never talked about this on this podcast. And to be honest with you, I don't even think that I've really mentioned it very much on any of my social media, except for maybe like, kind of periodically here and there, really just kind of, analogous to, to something else. But I actually grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons. I haven't played for quite a long time. And in all honesty, I was really, if you ask my parents, I was never supposed to have been playing it in the first place. They actually told me that specifically, that I wasn't allowed to play Dungeons and Dragons because it had to do with, allegedly had to do with devil worship. I was about 13 years old at the time, and I think that you know how well that tends to go over with a 13-year-old kid. If your parents say that you're not supposed to do something, you're just going to go over to your friend's place and do it there. Right? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, it's exactly like when when my parents said I was supposed to watch South Park or Ren and Stimpy or Beavis and Butthead. It was like, you know, you go watch it at a friend's place. You don't watch it at home. It doesn't, that's all there is to it. It's not really any kind of a real barrier. And so through my teenage years into my 20s, yeah, me and my friends, we would play Dungeons and Dragons, you know, definitely like weekly, like at least once or twice a week. It was just the thing that we were into. That was the group that we were. And then as I kind of moved on, and I kind of moved away from home, and I went to university, and I did things like that, I kind of drifted apart from that circle of friends. And now it's like, even if I wanted to play it now, it's like I don't really think that I even know anybody that does play. But anyhow, so there is a reason why I just kind of rambled on about that like that. And it has to do with a recent news story that has come out in relation to Dungeons and Dragons, something that when I found out about it, really just kind of got my blood boiling at the sheer arrogance of the people who have come to be in charge of it. And so, right now, Dungeons and Dragons, it no longer rests with its original creators. Apparently, the company that they had set up for this thing, to publish Dungeons and Dragons, for several decades, was a company by the name of TSR. And so TSR eventually sold out to Wizards of the Coast, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the company that also publishes Magic cards, which, by the way, is something that I've never been into. I'm not into that now. Was never into that, as a teenager. Never in my life. I've played hours and hours and hours of D&D. I have barely touched a Magic card, not alone played an actual game of Magic. But regardless, so the company that owned Magic then owned Dungeons and Dragons, and eventually they sold out to Hasbro. And so now Hasbro is the owner of Dungeons and Dragons, and they put in charge of that franchise the biggest bunch of nimrods to ever walk the face of the earth. It is embarrassing how arrogant and imbecilic these people are. And that actually becomes obviously the case when you consider something that happened recently with one of their publications. And so the original creator of Dungeons and Dragons, there was actually a few of them, but kind of the biggest name amongst them was a guy by the name of Gary Gygax. He was like the principal creator. There were a bunch of different guys that also kind of participated in the creation of it, were very helpful to him. I don't mean to diminish any of their contributions or anything like that, but the person who is mostly credited with the creation of Dungeons and Dragons is Gary Gygax. And so recently, Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast were able to get their grubbing little mitts on the notes that Gary Gygax and his friends kept while they were creating Dungeons and Dragons. And they have decided to publish those notes for people to be able to read and enjoy, which, actually that sounds pretty cool. Like a great amount of insight into the creative minds that created something as iconic as Dungeons and Dragons. For for good or ill, Dungeons and Dragons is probably the most, I don't know, maybe second to Tolkien in the fantasy genre. Like, that's how iconic Dungeons and Dragons is. And I didn't even really need to explain that to anybody. But anyhow, it would be very cool to actually, like, I think that sounds pretty cool, to be able to read those notes and gain insight into the creation of that. But unfortunately, the entire thing has been ruined by some doofus. I'm not even going to do this guy the dignity of naming him here. I'm not even going to. I'm not going to dignify him. With that amount of recognition. I was going to kind of call him the nameless dingbat. This nameless dingbat who wrote the foreword for the Gygax notes, and basically he set out to bury Gary Gygax and his co-creators. And so they basically, they wrote this thing, and they basically said that Gary Gygax was like a racist, misogynist, accused him of cultural appropriation. And that right then and there is kind of where you start to understand that this person is an idiot who really should not be taken seriously. Because cultural appropriation isn't a thing. Like, that's not real. It is so not a thing. It is so not real that really the only people that believe that it is a thing are people who are themselves racist. Right? People who actually believe that, like, the color of your skin should dictate, what kind of cultural experiences you even can have. Let alone, like, the cultural experiences that you do have. Basically, the color of your skin should decide what cultural experiences you are eligible to have. You want to talk about a belief where everybody should just kind of be separate from one another and kept in their little boxes, and kept away from each other. That's what this belief basically boils down to. And the only people that believe in things like that are people who are racist. And by the way, if you actually happen to believe that cultural appropriation is real, that it's a thing, you might as well shut this podcast down right now. You might as well just shut this off right now and never come back. Because I'm not going to discuss this with you. This is not open for discussion. I'm not interested in hearing from people that believe in it. Right? I don't talk about things like that with people. I don't talk about things like this with racists, especially not with, like, imbecilic racists. By the way, I think that being a racist and being an imbecile, they just kind of go hand in hand. But anyhow, so now that we've kind of established that, you kind of have to address just the basic complaint here being made against Mr. Gygax, and then you have to look at these people that are bringing forward that complaint, and it's like, isn't that what you guys are doing, though? Cultural appropriation? Like, just in being involved in Dungeons and Dragons in the first place, like, aren't you guys culturally appropriating? Because think about where Dungeons and Dragons came from, where it became popular. Basically, it became, popular might not be the word, but it attained its popularity, all the way back in, like, the 1970s, 1980s, into the 1990s, chiefly among, like, working class and middle-aged white teenagers. Chiefly men, but some women. But yeah, basically white teenagers. That's where this bit of culture emerged from. If you want to if you want to examine it through the lens of the kind of person that believes in cultural appropriation, Dungeons and Dragons, basically, it is like a white cultural product. So, I'm kind of under the impression that we're being told that cultural appropriation is supposed to be a bad thing. I mean, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't exist. But if it did exist, I'm actually not of the opinion that it actually would be a bad thing. I think that it's good for people to experience things from other cultures, partake in things from other cultures, share those things in common. I think that's a good thing. I think that brings people together. I think that unifies. Not that these people actually want, anybody to unify or be unified. But that's the way that, personally, that's the way that I see it. But it's not the way that they see it. Like, they think that it actually is a bad thing. So, I mean, it's not real. But if it were real, I mean, it's not bad, but you think it's bad. Like, so what are you doing then? Maybe you should not be involved. Because you keep telling us that cultural appropriation is bad. I mean, but here you are, kind of appropriating something that was created by a white guy, and basically, trying to bury him specifically because he's white and created this thing, doing the same thing that you accused him of doing. What are you doing here? I mean, don't get me wrong, at all, because I actually kind of like the idea. I kind of like that Dungeons and Dragons grew well beyond, that kind of, that cultural core that had created its popularity all the way back in the 70s and 80s, and even into the 90s. Kind of glad that it grew beyond that and found popularity amongst people of all cultures, all genders. I think that's absolutely fantastic. But you don't. I mean, provided that you're actually true to your word, you don't believe that. So I guess the question is, like, what are you doing here? I don't mind you being here. Or at least, rather, I should say that I probably wouldn't mind you being here if you weren't here to do what apparently it is that you seem to think that you're here to do, where you're just kind of basically here to, take this thing over and and kind of dance on the graves of the people that actually created it, and come around and piss on their graves, which is really kind of literally what they're doing. Because here's the thing, is that they didn't get these notes from Gary Gygax, because Gary Gygax passed away years ago. Like, Gary Gygax passed away a long time ago. And actually, most of the people that worked with him to create Dungeons and Dragons, they also passed away years ago. So to me, that's maybe what I find to be the most grotesque thing, is that this clown, this nameless doof, this nameless dingbat, he wants to basically stand on the shoulders of these giants, while himself basically have created nothing of value. He wants to stand on the shoulders of these giants. He wants to piss on their graves. All the while basically betraying the Gygax family. Like, if I were in that family, if I were one of his surviving family members, I would be absolutely disgusted by this. I would be fucking furious. There would be absolutely no way the Wizards of the Coast or Hasbro would ever get their hands on anything related to Gary Gygax ever again. Just on account of this absolute betrayal of the man by people who, quite frankly, they owe everything that they're doing right now to the thing that he, to the work that he did. These low IQ vandals who are just wandering into this thing, and they think that they're going to stumble along decades later, having created absolutely nothing of value related to this or anything else, And they're the ones that are going to do better everything that Gary Gygax already did, the thing that he did that they could never do. These are people that could never do what Gary Gygax did, could never accomplish the thing that he accomplished. And then when they are entrusted by the Gygax family, with this very, very precious thing that is near and dear to them, has to be near and dear to them. And these stupid pricks, they turn around and they do this. I think that I have been this disgusted before, but I don't remember when. And definitely not often. But it does remind you that if you are a creator, and it does just so happen that I myself, I am a creator. I haven't actually produced a piece of writing now for a little while, but I'm going to put some more time now to put aside a lot more time to actually, work a lot more at that. But kind of reminds you, be very careful. Like if you create something and it attains a certain amount of value, and if you ever decide that you would rather sell that and entrust that to somebody else, be very careful who you sell to. Because they might not be people who really have respect, any kind of respect whatsoever, for the thing that you created and the accomplishment that the creation of it was. They might just turn around and do what these stupid pricks did. And then just, fucking bury you and then sit there and try to pretend like they're the real geniuses. So I guess maybe that is the lesson in all of this. And it is the sort of thing that actually makes me very thankful that for the most part the Tolkien family has managed to keep control over Lord of the Rings. Because if they ever let that out in the open and let somebody and sold that entire thing lock, stock, and barrel to somebody else, God only knows what the hell would happen with it.